Hello and welcome to episode number 2 with Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brodt on the origins of Kol Nidrei and Hataras Nedarim. This episode has been generously sponsored by an anonymous donor in memory of his grandfather, Chaim ben Avraham. May all the learning, all the knowledge be an Eloi for his neshama. To sponsor future episodes, please reach out at swedem@ou.org, SCHWEDM@ou.org. Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brodt. We are here for part 2 to discuss the origins of Kol Nidrei and Hataras Nedarim. Last time we went through basically from the origin. What is the origin? I think you'll speak about that a little bit more. Until more or less current day, we discussed the Rishonim, the opinions of the Rishonim, the Ga'inim. Many of the Ga'inim, could be all the Ga'inim, seem to be anti-Kol Nidrei. Most of the Sephardic Rishonim also were not Geiris Kol Nidrei. They didn't have Kol Nidrei, but we do find the shift that the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, already does bring down Kol Nidrei. So we spoke about that. Here we are going to discuss some other interesting topics. We're going to be discussing the Kabbalah aspect of Kol Nidrei. Why is it in Aramaic? And again, who made it? And what does it have to do with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Perhaps we'll touch on that as well. And some other interesting historical facts related to Kol Nidrei. Rabbi Brodt, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
Okay, it's good to hear. You give me your Baruch Hashem. I know that we're primed and ready to go with a exciting episode. So if you want to give us a quick recap of what we discussed and dive right in.
Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief recap like this. We have a tefillah called Kol Nidrei, which everyone knows. We begin the davening of Yom Kippur night, and it says there's a nusach. It says Kol Nidrei. Then there's a few sentences. It's all in Aramaic, and we say the Nedarim basically from Yom Kippur zeh ad Yom Kippur haba aleinu l'taiva. That's one girsa, and in many machzairim you'll find in parentheses it says Yom Kippur sha'avar ad Yom Kippurim zeh u'Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippur haba aleinu l'taiva, which is a combination. It's past year and the future year. So we pointed out that the standard nusach of those that did say Kol Nidrei was that it was going on the past year. The Nedarim that were sort of being mater neder for the Nedarim that we did this past year, and we're getting Hatara. We're asking for Hatara. Now the problem is that when one learns Mesechus Nedarim, there's numerous questions how this works out with various sugyas. How could one be mater neder? If you know your neder, you have to say it specifically. Where's the bezdin? You have all different issues that are brought up in the Rishonim. So we brought down the Rush says it's not really being mater neder, because if you do know what your neder was, it's a problem. So the Rush, he says that we retain the nusach that it's going on the nedarim of the past year, but it's just kedei lahatzal min ha'einish, and that's why we say Shalish Palmim, Bagamar Nislach L'chal Das Bnei Yisrael when we finish Kitzrichen Kapara Oisen Shavru on the Nedarim that we were over. But it's Avada Naf Nedarim that we know of. The Rabbeinu Tam brought down all the Rishonim over here. He has a massive arichus in Sefer Yashar, and basically he switches the nusach. His father already proposed it, and it's going on the future. So we're basically saying that Nedarim that we're going to make in the next year, we're sort of asking for Hatara even before we make them. Okay, now. So what happened is that basically, as I pointed out already last time, Naftali Vida traces how which nusach, if people went like Rabbeinu Tam, if people went like the Rush, but eventually people, and which is what you find in many machzerim, they just did both. Okay, now that's just a recap of what happened, but we brought down, and this is also significant, is that Lamashal. Just to mention very, very briefly, is Rabbi Yaakov Emden in a tshuva in Siman Kuf Mem Hey. He talks about the nusach of Kol Nidrei, and he says basically that the Lashon Arami was very this tefillah is as we know is in Aramaic, and there's many diktuk mistakes in it because people did not know, they were not makir the lashon Arami al Buryuf. They didn't know it properly, and there should be different issues. But Lamaisa, we're going to keep it, and he kept the way his nusach was, is that he kept it. He kept both. Now, he was an expert in Aramaic. We know this because Lamashal, there's a Chibur Meturgaman, which is a sort of a dictionary on Aramaic from Rabbi Bacher, and he wrote many Ha'aras on it, and recently it was reprinted by Mechon Zichron. But Lamaisa, there's a current expert today on Aramaic and language, Bechlal, Professor Richard Steiner. He has a massive article in English, way above my pay grade, and if one language is not my thing, Aramaic language is not my thing, where he talks about it, showing al pi diktuk that many of the Nuschais and Rishonim are correct al pi diktuk. If one wants the article, you could send them a PDF, but it's something that I can't claim to have any understanding about. Now, what we did mention also was that those the Goinim were very against it, but not only Goinim, Rishonim of Svarad, Lamashal, the Rambam doesn't bring it down, the Ramban was very anti it, and just in Provence was very, very, also they were very against it. One lashon to quote is from Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Mordechai from the Mishpacha of the Kimchis, and he says, also talking a whole piece about it, that we don't say it in Provence. V'loman mikol dvar malal shaminig hazeh al eza nuch shenemar einay minig elotoyis. It's a mistake, and kol goyni bavel svardash mipiyam anu chayim u'masayim anu oisin. And then he says, "L'zeloi zichru avis ha'olam harif Rambam haminig hazeh b'chibureim neishu keneged sharshe Kabbalah k'van mizbatel zeh haminig hayoyim b'roiv ha'mekaymis sheibam chachamim gedolim u'bekim u'chalila lases pol yavai hamoyin v'zlasim le'michshol," because many problems could come up with it, etc. And basically, this was the approach anti the minig. Okay. Now, that is just a recap of what we spoke about in a nutshell, the main sheetas, and then we went through speaking about in the Neisa Kelem and Shulchan Aruch what happened, etc. Okay, but the question that needs to be answered is there attempt to be answered is hold on one second. We have. It's in Aramaic. What's shot? It's in Aramaic. So the Ravan brings down. It's in Aramaic because it was in Bavel, and it was so that the Hamoin Am could understand it. That's why. And the Levush says a similar type of thing. It was Nesakim Bavel and Iker Lashon. We know, everyone knows from Pesach Halach Ma'anya that the Leil Seder begins with Aramaic tefillah. Okay. Lamaisa, there's the Shittim Gebetzes on the side, which is printed on the side of the Gemara Nedarim. He brings down. It's Anshe Knesses Hagedoila Tiknulanu Lahasim in a Michshol, because people make a Nedarim and they forget. So this is what we're doing over here, Leil Yom Kippur, when we begin with this tefillah. So these are two Mekairis that seem to say that it's either in Bavel or Anshe Knesses Hagedoila. Okay. So that's something about somewhat of the origins, but we hope to, through the course in the discussion, we're going to discuss a little bit more.
And the Anshe Knesses Hagedola were not in Bavel, correct?
Whatever the Anshe Knesses Hagedola, whenever you learn Gemara, we'll leave it with whatever that refers to.
Okay, fine. So many shuls. It's interesting. I know we discussed this beforehand that this is a minig, which is. I mean, people could let us know. Is there any place in Klal Yisrael that doesn't have this minig of Kol Nidrei? So it's interesting that it's really everywhere in all segments of Klal Yisrael. I haven't been to that many shuls, but the shuls that I've been to all sing it with the same Niggun, and it's a pretty haunting Niggun. I guess our listeners from who are not traditional Ashkenazi can let us know if in other areas there are other Niggunim, not the traditional, that I guess you and I are used to. But tell us a little bit about the Niggun behind it.
So here too, I'm not going to go into all that. There's like everything else. There's I call rabbit holes. So there's in the city of Kol Nidrei, you could go down different rabbit holes. I'm not going down the rabbit holes of music because I'm not an expert. I'm very far from an expert in music, but there's a lot been written about this too. But Lamashal, if one looks in the Mata Ephraim, when he's talking about Kol Nidrei, he says, "Benigin hamasukan makubum mikedem Kol Nidrei." Basically, it sounds like it's a early. There's a minig, and maybe the minig that we have. It's already far back. The Aruch HaShulchan, and Yeridea writes, "V'yesh as a niggun miyucha b'chol tfutzas Yisrael." Seems to be there was a universal minig. Lamaisa, looking in the Machzer Vitri, which also was only printed more recent from manuscript, it says something b'ne'ima u'bezemer. That there was and in a lot of sources we see something about that there's a Niggun. Is it an exact Niggun or not? Recently I came across Lamashal, the Alfei Menashe, where in Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, the fascinating work Alfei Menashe, and so Menashe Milya, he has a piece, a whole very interesting piece, not for now, but he's talking at the end, he talks about Kol Nidrei, and then he says some type of Lashon, we are really apidiktuk, based on what we discussed in episode 1, that there's problems in the exact nusach of the tefillah. So he says, but the people are scared to change the nusach to be correct apidiktuk. Why? Because then it's going to yishtane hanigin hamakubel. Shechas v'shalom im yishaneh yigremu kama kilkulim ba'ilamos shenesaken al piasoy. Basically, something to the effect that there was a known niggun, and you don't want to mess up the niggun, so we don't change the nusach, even though the nusach really, ideally, should be changed. Anyway, recently, a sefer came out from a very chashuv Rav, Reb Shlomo David Kahana, who was known as the father of Agunos. After World War II, he answered many different shilas in Yerushalayim. He was a Rav he was Av Bezdin in Varsha beforehand. And he was an expert in Agunos amongst many other areas. And just mamish a few weeks ago, Mechon Yerushalayim put out a volume of his collecting of his materials based on manuscripts and articles of his that were published in different places, with a whole introduction. And I come across, as I'm preparing my Shir Kol Nidrei, right then I get the Sefer, and he has a piece that seemed to have been published in Tel Aviv way back in a journal, which talks about this minig of the Niggun, this haunting Niggun, so to speak. Where is it from? And he brings that it was known that people quote that it has something to do with Inquisition. That the Anusim in Svara, this was a way, there's some type of story behind it that people know about. But he says, and that relates to the whole tefillah of Kol Nidrei. But he says that's pasha. It can't be true because we know, and he points this out already. We already saw that the Rosh, who predates the Inquisition, the Rabbeinu Tam, who definitely does, and even the Goyim who are against it, but if they're talking about it, so it means it's beforehand. But anyway, I was curious to know anything about this. I did not look into it fully, but I asked someone about it. So he told me, he remembers growing up, there was the famous Birnbaum Siddur that many people use. This predates the Art Scroll, and it says over here, Kol Nidrei acquired intense significance, particularly during the period of persecutions in Spain, where some 100,000 Jews were forced to forswear their faith and adopt a new religion. Many of those attended a synagogue in secret at the risk of their life and used the Kol Nidrei text as a form of renouncing the vows imposed upon them as the Inquisition, which is interesting. So somehow in the beginning of the 16th century, a chazan in Germany composed a stirring tune which expresses fear and passionate plea and hope for ultimate deliverance. And this is the minig which the Ashkenazim took from the Svardim, who would say Kol Nidrei, and that's an interesting mahalach in what's going on behind Kol Nidrei. But Lamaisa, we're not going to go more into this. There's people that shteltzu that has something to do with Beethoven. Maybe there was even a whatever. But I'm a friend of mine, Menachem Butler, sent me once an article all about it for the experts in Beethoven and whatever. I'm not going into, but I'm just throwing it out there because I see the Lashinus in the Paiskin that talk about with the Niggun. Okay. Lemaisa, that is some aside point relating to this minute. Okay, let's get more into the meat and potatoes over here, as they say. We have that the Shibolei Haleket brings down a whole piece. Shibolei Haleket, which is Italian, so to speak, that's as important for us. Basically, he brings down from the Taisis Rid a whole Handelrai in the sugi over here, his brother, himself, and they're dealing with this Rabbeinu Tam that we spoke about beforehand. They say they're not interested. They don't like this thing that he's changing the nusach and the tefillah. It's in all the machzairim, and we don't just stam change the machzairim stamazai. So why do we say this tefillah? So again, they're aware of all the issues that it's alpis, Hataras Nedarim, it's not really anything. So Lamaisa, the Shibolei Haleket brings over here in Bekitzer that it's just because normally tshuva helps for everything, but if you made a neder and you know about it, then tshuva does not help, and that's what it is. Maybe you were matter neder for tzedakah and stuff like that. So just to remind us about this, that's why we're saying this tefillah. But it's avada, not a halachic being matter neder and alpi mesechnes nedarim. It would have any bearings in the thing. It's very kedai to read these few pages in the Shibolei Haleket, the Rid, and his brother, what they talk about in this sugya. Now, interestingly enough, they bring up in this sugya, in this piece, they talk about a bracha that some people in Italy, you see how far a minig went. Goyim talk about not even why even making it, and then somehow it became so makubal that people handle if you should make a bracha, and they actually did. Professor Sharei Adam found that people made a bracha. Tuvia Freund in a Sefer Me'al L'Simcha found that people made a bracha. In Italy, it seems some people were against it. The Sefer Tadi L'Mash is against it. The Shibolei Haleket over here says against it, but in various machzerim it seems they did. Okay. So what's interesting is what's happening. It's not out this reason that, let's say I just said from the Shibolei Haleket that they came with a bracha.
What bracha would they make on it? Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvahs of
Hataras Nedarim, something like that. That if you want to know the nusach, wait. If I have one in front of me, I don't have the exact nusach, but I'm pretty sure that's something like that. Rabbi Yosef Engel already in the Nedarim Daf Nun Tes talks about it. And interestingly enough, is that we have one of these pieces that came from the Karoyim from Perkei Bambaboy. So fascinating. It's his own story. But over there, we're talking about a Gaonic piece, anti Kol Nidrei. It says that they would even make a bracha. It says, meaning to say that it was already known in the times of the Goyim. Not only were they anti them doing the whole thing, but they went so far with going with this Kol Nidrei that they actually made a bracha. Anyway, but as I said, that's not that is its own discussion. Okay, fine. Say this is again. We still need more clarification in this in Kol Nidrei. What's going on in Kol Nidrei? So, Lamaisa, I already pointed out a little bit that it's mamish. It's very mysterious. And when we learn, and I pointed out, which I said this played a lot of for Rabbeinu Tam Bechlal, is it's often a Gemara. Not only is it often a Gemara, it's a Mishnah, because the Gemara, there's a Mishnah in Chaf Gimel Amid Aleph in Nedarim, which is very schwer. Then the Gemara says Chesuri Mechsera, and we spoke about this a little bit in the Shir and Chanukah. The Chesuri Mechsera means it's really in the Mishnah. You just have to know how to figure it out. The Vilna Gaon was able to figure out how it's in the Mishnah, and Rishonim also were able to do this. What does it say? That it says, "Haroitz Shelah Yiskayim Nedar of Kol Hashana Yamei BeRosh Hashanah VeYom Kol Nidrei Shani Asa Lidar Yibato." So we see that on Rosh Hashanah they did such a thing. So it's often a Gemara. So, but for some reason the Mishnah is vague about it. Now the Gemara. Then there's a key line right afterwards. The Gemara talks about it. So Rav Huna said, "Okay, let's let everyone know about this. That you should do this." Says Rava, "Tana kamasayim leistuma kadesh loy noigu kalas roish benedarim va'atar sheli bepirka." You want to let everyone know about this? There's a reason why the Mishnah said it very cryptically, and in the Chesuri Mechsera type of thing. Gufa not to let the secret get out, and you want to go be mefaris in the secret. So now this is a very big problem. So first of all, we're seeing already is in the Gemara it's a secret, and there's a handle right in the Gemara. How should we let it out? Because what's going to happen if we're telling people you're going to make a neder the whole year, but you don't have to worry about it because on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur you already matter neder. It's like, so all my promises are worthless before I even start. It's frightening. So it's a very schwer thing. Now, we spoke about that similarly, that somehow this relates to a sugya, which is why Masechnas Nedarim wasn't learned, because there was a skier of being that's going to cause a zilzul in Nedarim and Shvuos that people are going to think it means nothing, and Memela Goyim, they didn't learn it, so they wiped it out of learning. Now, you have to understand, when we're discussing the origins of different sugyas, we find that it's shrouded in mystery, and it was gufa because of the Hamoinam Chazal at the various times they held not to make it public, such as it's known in the sugya of Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah, you look in the Paiskim, the mainstream sources, you will not find the reasons. We come to Kabbalah. And there's a discussion about it. Rabbi Kamenetsky speaks about it. Amos Liakov, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach speaks about it. Why is it that it's hidden from the Hamoinam? Similarly to Rosh Hashanah, the Psukim don't talk about the Yom Hadin of Rosh Hashanah. We only know this from later on, from the times of Gemara. But why is it not openly like this? This is l'chayra another nekuda in Yom Kippur, that this tefillah of Kol Nidrei or whatever is behind it. Also, there's a mystery behind it. So the shaila is, but you can abolish a whole masechta because of this. What's happening? How do we even understand this? Now, Lamaisa, it's clear is that we're very in the dark about these tkufas. As much as we know today because of all the major discoveries, but the tkufas of Ga'inim and everything, we're in the dark. Lamaisa, interestingly enough, the fascinating sefer Mari Nayim from Rabbi Nedarim, which certain people were very against, notably the Maral, but many Gedolim used the work. Over here, my heter to use the work is an Enikol Maral, the Chavas Yar, Makar Chaim brings down this, he sends me to this piece, he quotes it, he argues on a certain part of it, and he asks the following question. He wants to know, in general, we find certain times you're not supposed to tell Amaratzim, you're not supposed to tell people about it, but we find it's written. Let me say, if someone learns Bavli, if someone today goes to Daf Yomi Mishir, in Mesechnes Nedarim, he's going to learn, the secret's going to be out. So what we find Chazal, even though it's a Chesur Mechsra as a secret, but it gets out. So how does one deal with this? And Rabbi Nedarim talks about this in a sefer, trying to come up with something. He says, the fear was to give it an open drasha. But if it's Biksav, they weren't so nervous. I guess that was in those days, in the times, and they didn't not necessarily, everyone was literate. But eventually, today, everyone goes to Daf Yomi Mishir. Where is the Gvul? Who's Amaretz? Who's not Amaretz? How does one even understand it? Interestingly enough, over there he quotes the Mefarish of on the Gemara Nedarim. So he also was aware that the Rashi in Nedarim is not Rashi. But the point is, but he says, if you open up the Tur, the Rambam, they have a Gan Hilchos Nedarim. How does one work this out? So it seems that to give it publicly, it might be a problem. So then how am I giving a shir? So Baruch Hashem, I'm not giving the shir publicly. It happens to be, it might be recorded. I have no idea, but I'm just talking to one person. So I'm off the hook. L'maiser of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he struggles with this. You could see in his work on Nedarim also, because like this Gemara, if you're taking this Gemara in Nedarim, Chaf Gimel Mabez, literally, we're stuck. But on the other hand, we have Gans Hilchos Nedarim out there. We have a whole Shulchan Aruch. It's not only about being Mater Neder, this interesting thing that you're doing. So it's a very tough question, and obviously another issue is going to be is the printing changes all this. Once the print, this is all talking about the manuscript time, or even in the times of the Gemara where it wasn't even published yet, written. But once it gets written, so Lamaisa, you see they're handling this question, and it really requires a good answer because it's not only over here. Now, in short, just to mention briefly the following nekudas. Number one is some people say Kol Nidrei really started from Amaratzim, and that's what some. If you look carefully in the different quotes of all the Ga'inim that we have today, that's really what was going on, and that's why the Ga'inim were very stark against it, and they basically were. The fear was they really took this, and then people Taka people came to Mazals with it, so they had to stop it. There was no other way to stop it. So they had to come down hard, and so hard that they basically abolished a Masechta from being learned in the Masech in the Seder. But obviously, it needs more eon about what was going on then. Briefly, we mentioned that Rabbi Yam Moshe Levine, when he put out his Eitz Gainim, he deals with the whole thing why they didn't learn Gain, why they didn't learn in the time of the Gain, they didn't learn Masechtas Nedarim. So it seems it's linked to all this, which is that at a certain point in time, which also requires eon exactly when, is that it came along Karoyim, and there was a very big battle the Ga'inim had to deal with Karoyim. Karoyim, different aspects of the Torah they didn't like. They felt they took everything literal, and one of the things that very much bothered them, we have documentation of this even, is Nedarim. They couldn't wrap their brains around such a thing, had to be mater and neder. So he says that is what's behind the why they didn't learn it, Mesechnes Nedarim, because they didn't want to openly let it out, so to speak. That there's such a heter, and also because they were getting heavy opposition about it. So being say be'etzem avada, so basically so that the Karoyim wouldn't have the Karoyim were attacking the Yidden, so they would have one less thing to attack. But not that they were not that the being mater neder doesn't exist. We avada hold it exists, just to not to have it so openly. Ad kedei kach, they didn't learn a masechta for it. This is like a very extreme reaction to it. Okay, but Lamaisa. That's what so Bam Levine talks about Barichus in his Hagdama to Mesechnes Nedarim.
Just to clarify, when you say they didn't learn it, you mean they didn't like erase it from their actual learning? You meant learning it publicly and teaching it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, that's what sorry. Very good for clarifying that. It means is that in the curriculum they learned many Masechtas the times ago, but Masechtas Nedarim we see for a whole tkufa until we spoke about this by opening of the Nedarim. Certain Rishonim they start learning it again, but there was it was missing for a few hundred years, which is very strange, but that's how the battle with the Karoyim was so great. Now, interestingly enough, my good friend Rabbi Elio Greenswag has a sefer on Chumash, and in this sefer he has a piece which was originally printed in Yerushalayim, which is called L'Haitzi Miliban Shel Tzdukim, that we find many different minhagim. Gufa, the reaction was to be against tzdukim. One thing he rather points out, I mentioned there was a whole deal that some people made a bracha about it. Was Gufa to show that there's a Torah Shabbal Peh. They made a bracha on being mater neder. He says Gufa to go against the tzdukim. That's what he points out in his work, and I could send out the piece where he shows many different mitzvahs. Really, the story behind it has to do with this polemic between the Karoyim and regular Jews. Now, I just and there's a lot of sources to this, and this relates to different aspects about it, but just to quote one Maramakim about it, and then we'll move on to another Nakuda, which is the Rogachover. Interestingly enough, especially in recent years, we're being zeichet to have more and more material of the Rogachover, who was prolific in his lifetime. He wrote a crazy amount. And there's a fellow in Modin Elite that he's obsessed with the Rogachover. I call him a Rogachover junkie. He's put out 5 massive volumes of material. A lot of it's brand new. Now, some of the material is Ha'aris on the Hazaris of Reb Shlomo ben Gamliel, which is Hazaris, which has the Taryag Mitzvah, is a nusach of the Taryag Mitzvah, how he counted the Taryag Mitzvahs. So the Zer Rakia from the Tajbitz wrote Ha'aris is a chibur of Ha'aris on the Hazaris of Reb Shlomo ben Gamliel. Comes along the Rogachover and he writes Ha'aris on both these people. Fine. So there's a Ha'ara about being mater neder, about the sugya of being mater neder. Says the Rogachover, what's the reason why we do it so bepumbei on we're doing Hataras Nedarim? He says against the tzdukim and the, which means he's referring to the Karoyim. This is what how the Rogachover says, and that's why we're doing the Gufa, the Kol Nidrei Tefillah, is to show we're not. We say a different way of the battle. I mean to say the way that which is similar to what I'm saying. Rav Greenswag is saying over with the Bracha. You say some in the Goinim held not to say it because so that the Karoyim shouldn't have what to attack us. But at a certain point in time, it's to show us no, we're not giving in to them, and we're fighting it. Interestingly enough, the Rogachover, just a cute line over here, is the Rogachover in his first Ta'ara. So the Tajbit says about Reb Shlomo ben Gamliel that of these Hazaris, he says. He says he wasn't such a big Talmud Chacham, which gets into a whole dion, the Rambam Kiyadua and his Sefer Ma'anei HaMitzvos as Harais, were they Balei Halacha, weren't they Balei Halacha? And the Rambam says something, he's very against these people, but it's not clear who the Rambam is referring to. Some people say he is referring to Reb Shlomo ben Gamliel, and according to this Tajbitz, it would sound like that's one of the people that the Rambam might be referring to. Says the Rogachover, no. It's a chutzpah to say such a thing on this Meshumodim Hanifla, and he was a great person. So Lamaisa, these in this Ha'ara they take out some lines, they censor out 3 words, this lashon of chutzpah, but in one nusach of it, earlier edition of these Ha'aras, they do have it. But what the point is, I was wondering what's going on. The Rajab is defending Rabbi ben Gamliel, and the answer is very simple. The Rogachover is kiyadua. He used to like to argue on Rishonim. This is v'derech tzachos, as they say, milchus l'bedichusa, just in the middle of a boring shir, just to throw out a joke. So the Rogachover basically had a problem. He really would love to argue on a Rishon. But over here, so he does. He's Yaitza. How is he Yaitza? He defends a Rishon by arguing on a different Rishon. So he was still able to go to Shitase of arguing on some Rishon. Anyway, bottom line is that this is relating to the Karoyim polemic. Okay, fine. And there's obviously a lot to sharpen and talk about it more. Maybe in different times we could come back to it. However, the title of the shir that we gave is Kol Nidrei and being mater neder, and we're trying to look for it. We have this Gemara, right? We keep on coming back to this Gemara Nedarim, which clearly says that they're doing something on Rosh Hashanah. This Gemara Chav Gimel, this cryptic Gemara. So one shaila is, but the Gemara says Rosh Hashanah. We keep on saying it says Rosh Hashanah. We're handling Yom Kippur. Kol Nidrei is Yom Kippur. What's going on? So Rabbeinu Tam and Sefer Yasha already handles, and he says that we find times that when it says Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah really means Yom Kippur. He points this out. He says this, and he says really it was originally supposed to be Rosh Hashanah. We switched it to Yom Kippur because of there's Bittul Malacha, so maybe there's more time on Rosh Hashanah than on Rosh Hashanah. So me say the Gemara, the original takana was especially of Rabbeinu Tam, which is to talk about being mater neder of the nedarim of the future, was on Rosh Hashanah. It was switched to Yom Kippur, or when it says Rosh Hashanah, you got to know that Rosh Hashanah sometimes means Yom Kippur, and there are other such places. This Rabbeinu Tam already points out. Comes along, as we keep on always saying, we like to say, is that there's such a thing called the Chayei Adam, all these different discoveries, and bottom line is, there's a piece it's published in a few different places called Hilchos Eretz Yisrael Menagniza, Sefer HaMaisim. We're not just due to lack of time, we're not going to get into barichas of what the Makayos are, but these are basically halachic pieces that come out preserving Makayos of Yerushalmi type stuff. And in there we find this interesting passage. The passage is, it says that it says as follows. It says, Ein matir nedarim belel Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos. U'b'matzei Shabbos mutter v'aser ben liyacha ben l'tzibar belel Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos. So what's going on over here? You see, this is an ancient makar, which is discovered in the Chayei Adam again, and there's a whole fascinating story behind this piece. But basically, we see that Taka in Eretz Yisrael, there was a minig to be matir neder, like the Pashup Shad of this Gemara, this Bavli, that they did it on Rosh Hashanah. Just on Shabbos is a bazunder issue, and that's a sugya grad in Nedarim, if you're allowed to be matir neder on Shabbos. So, but be'etzem, they were matir neder in Eretz Yisrael, they did it on Shabbos, on Rosh Hashanah, like the Gemara, just on Shabbos. If Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbos, they didn't do it. So here we have Professor Tashma already points, and all the people that talk about this piece, this is the earliest source of them actually doing it. This predates Ga'inim. This is mamish in the beginning of Ga'inim time also. Now, we're not going to get into all the arichas about it, but there's a fellow, Moshe David Har, who has an excellent article, pages and pages about it, where he talks about trying to figure out the exact breakdown of what happened. Incredible makayros he has on the whole sugya of Kol Nidrei and the whole development and the Ga'inim and learning Mesechnos Nedarim and everything that he deals with this piece. However, but what's significant over here is that if you don't go like Rabbi, so here we see that Rabbeinu Tam had a problem. He says, "What we're doing Kol Nidrei on Yom Kippur at night. I have my Gemara Nedarim Chaf Gimel on Beis," says Rabbeinu Tam, steht in the Gemara Nedarim Chaf Beis, to do it on Rosh Hashanah. What's going on? Says Rabbeinu Tam, really Rosh Hashanah sometimes means Yom Kippur. From this piece we see it's literally Rosh Hashanah. Now we get to the question that we began. One of the questions that we wanted to know is, where does this happen that we're saying Hataras Nedarim Erev Rosh Hashanah? The answer is, where's the makar for this? Turns out it's a shlah. The shlah, contrary to what many people don't realize, is many people think the shlah is a chibur, a Kabbalistic chibur. Now, trust me, the Chidah has plenty of Kabbalah, way above my pay grade. However, the shlah was also a tremendous Bal Halacha. He was Av Bezdin and Rosh Hashiva in Frankfurt. And this chibur is Malay the Gadish with halacha. And the Magen Avram L'Dugma and other pais can bring down tons of halacha from the chibur. Over here, in Besechtes Yuma, as he calls it, he brings down Shteit and Gemara Nedarim, our Gemara, and then he brings down the discussion of Kol Nidrei. But he says, what's the minig? Eretz Yisrael, because as we know, he made Aliyah, and we have letters of him just talking about the Minhagim of Eretz Yisrael and different things he learned in Eretz Yisrael. They do on Erev Rosh Hashanah b'matir midrashim, Talmid Chacham v'Yirei Shemayim. They are matir neder. So that's fascinating. That's gewaldic. We say they're doing pashut like the Gemara. So here we have the Shlah, who's a Talmud of the Marshal Hasheni, who's a Talmud of the Marshal, who's known to go with the Alpi Gemaras. Pashut Pshan the Gemara and the Darim is, when do you do it? Rosh Hashanah. Or if you don't have time, you do it Erev Rosh Hashanah. That was the minig. And in Eretz Yisrael, the Shlah is saying in his time, that's what they did. And if you look, what's fascinating is he doesn't have Kol Nidrei. There's no discussion of Kol Nidrei in the Shlah for Yom Kippur. This is when they did it. If he didn't have time, some people didn't have Sharei Tzion tshuva. Now, how does this minig? So basically, is the minig of Hataras Nedarim that people do Erev Rosh Hashanah, or some people that don't have time, they're doing it. When do they do it? They do it in Sharei Tzion tshuva. Is one minig today, and then Kol Nidrei, like the Shlah. And if you learn the Gemara properly in the Rishonim, it's one minig. The Shiloh is just when to do it. Do you do it at Rosh Hashanah? Do you do Rosh Hashanah at night, like we have this Sefer Maisim, or do we do it on Yom Kippur, which is what how the Rabbeinu Tam has learned the Gemara, and which is the minig of many of Klal Yisrael is. So it became two minhagim it became one minig spread out and got to become two minhagim. Okay, so here we have the early origin. Now, why does the minig of Hataras Nedarim get so popular? Very simple. There's a chibur called Sharei Tzion, which one day it's worthy. Maybe we'll devote to discuss the significance and the popularity of this chibur. This chibur is a chibur of tefillah, and it has many different tefillahs that we say. One of the tefillahs that it has is Erev Rosh Hashanah, is the tefillah of being Mater Neder. This was printed over 100 times, this chibur, and it helped once the Sidurim game published. It went in there, and you'll find it all over the place. And so Mamela, the one minig, which either you do Erev Rosh Hashanah or Nasar Simei Tshuva or Kol Nidrei, became two separate minhagim that people don't realize is all really one minig. Okay, so this is some of the aspects behind the early origins. Now, just to move on, and this gets us to the world of Kabbalah. When we fast forward, we have, let's say, a chibur like the Chayei Adam. The Chayei Adam brings down saying both nuschais, and he brings a whole nusach. He brings a Hebrew nusach that he made. He also quotes Nakudas from the Chemdes Yamim, which will help us understand how this minig, how different aspects of this minig became more widespread. Because up till now, we don't have any indication from the Beis Yosef or anyone. The Shelah, they don't bring in anything about Kabbalah. What does Kabbalah say about this minig of Kol Nidrei or being Mater Neder Erev Rosh Hashanah? Does it say anything? Now, just before we go on to that, is that the Chachmas Adam, which is also by the Chayei Adam, he has as a tefillah, he has some type of thing that it seems there was some issue. The government probably had some problems with the tefillah of Kol Nidrei, which we'll be able to understand later on. Okay, anyway, bottom line is just to say this very, very briefly, is all of a sudden, up till now, we've discussed in episode 1, and now we didn't hear anything about Kabbalah. Is there anywhere in the Kabbalah that talks about it? So the answer is there's a few zayars. So there's a sefer called Yesh Sachar, which was before the Magen Avram's time, and he was malak at many different places where the zayar has something relating to Shulchan Aruch and to halacha, and he brings it down once or twice. The Magen Avram uses it, and this chibur is the makar for different zayars and stuff like that. Anyway, he brings down that there's two passages in the zayar that relate to Kol Nidrei. The problem is, so first of all, we're not going to get into this, but Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his fascinating work with Pachas Varim, and someone earlier, Ben Dairei of the Ramami Pano, Rav Shmuel Mishar Arya, in his Ha'aros against the Beis Yosef, he also talks about, they say both of them, they're not interested, don't talk about the Zayar for the Sugya Kol Nidrei, it's a late piece, it was stuck in there later on. Okay, but Lamaisa, when you look in a chibur, let's say the Beis David, Chashav Chibar in 1740 published. What does he bring down for a source for Kol Nidrei? The Zayar. So we have the Yesh Sachar and the Beis David. You're jumping right to 1740, but don't we know that the Beis Yosef is a makubal? The Beis Yosef brings Kabbalah. The Magen Avram is famous for bringing Kabbalah and hundreds of numerous pieces of Zayar. He brings halacha. Why does he bring that in here? The Shelah, why doesn't he bring in there? Furthermore, we mentioned that the Ramban is anti-saying Kol Nidrei. Ramban is a grace and makubal, and there's others Gedolei Sfard after Ramban who use the Zayar. Why don't any of them bring it down? And it's taka very shver shaila. Why is that the case? I don't have a good answer for this, but because we could have had is that the Beis Yosef, we asked the question pretty much. The Beis Yosef all of a sudden is going mamish. He says the Rivash, and he knows about the Minhag Sfard not to say it, the Ga'inim not to say it. The Rosh says we say it. What happened? Is it because of the Zayar or not? It's unclear. Why doesn't he just say it? The Beis Yosef does bring Zayar, although not as much as people think. He brings it very little, but he should say it over here. Anyway, it seems is the world of Arizal. Arizal does bring the Kol Nidrei Hishtal to the Zayar. And this relates to the whole story of why we're wearing a talis, according to some, although there's Makairos way before Kabbalah to wear the talis, but talis, the Sefer Torah, everyone says the Sefer Torah, everyone goes around with the Sefer Torah, many shuls. All this comes from Arizal, but before Arizal, you can't find this. And this is a question that R Yechiel Golver, who also spent a lot of time trying to go through many dozens of svarim about the sugya, he was not able to find how this works out, where this is coming from. But we see clearly something happens when it clashes with the world, not clashes, the world of Kabbalah, the Arizal, brings in different aspects of this minhag. And it goes on and on and on. We're not going to trace all the different aspects of this, but there are different makairos in halacha that come from Kabbalah, and this is one of them. L'mashal, the Aruch HaShulchan, tremendous. We know the Aruch HaShulchan, a Paisik, a Litvish, a Paisik. He's he handles all the different aspects. Says Kol Nidrei. So what are we doing with Kol Nidrei? It doesn't make sense. He says a lashon. One of his lashonis is the ein zeh moil l'shum davar. It doesn't help anything. So he says lamaisa, the nakuda is behind it. He shall sue. It's because of Kabbalah. He says he shall sue in many machzayrim. The Mater Ephraim also brings this. Now there's a piece in the Tikkunei Zayir that they say over. Some people say it before Kol Nidrei, during Kol Nidrei, and somehow the people that are experts in Kabbalah could understand from saying these pieces what is behind the actual minig of saying Kol Nidrei in the world of Kabbalah. Just one other nakuda with this is the Aruch HaKodesh talks about that he opened up he took out the Sefer Torah, he opened up the Heichal, and he felt mamish haya be'einai kepsicha Sharei Gan Eden. That and the whole Beis Medrash was lit. This is the Aruch HaKodesh writing this in a letter in the 1740s. Also a great makubal, so it's not shver that he's saying such a thing. So we see that world of Kabbalah somehow takes this to a whole new level, and certain aspects. People say the pasuk are Zarul Tzaddik when we're saying this tefillah also. Kol Nidrei, some people say it before, some people say it afterwards. So we see Kabbalah gave a whole new dimension to this minig, which Rishonim don't mention at all, and it's part of the Vaita, part of the mystery of this thing. Okay, I just would like to because we're running out of time over here, so I'm just going to briefly mention 3 historical points over here, and that will be our conclusion. And it's as follows, like this. Not only do Karoyim give a problem with Kol Nidrei, and it seems the Geonim were possibly because of the Karoyim, or possibly because of the sugya of Hataras Nedarim, how it relates, what are you doing with Kol Nidrei? But time and time again, they will cause problems. And we'll start backwards. In 1844, around that time, the Reform movement were making different changes in the Siddur, so they wanted to abolish. One of the things they attacked was Kol Nidrei, a chibur called Talmud Paris, which was published, which had numerous responses against them. Two of the chiburim Talmud Paris can be found on Hebrew books. The third one was published from manuscript in a chibur I've quoted a bunch of times, Shnais Darvadar from the Dessler family. He had a manuscript. So they have dozens of tshuvas gedolim saying, no, Kol Nidrei, leave it in. So we see that Kol Nidrei always gave a run for the money, as they say. If you, interestingly enough, if you look in the Yad Shol from the Sholem Meshiv and Hilchos Nedarim, Simrei Shid Aleph, he says a lashon, and that's what he's referring to. He says something to the effect. His lashon is, when he's talking about Kol Nidrei, he says that there's a tshuvas that were written to the Rav Hirsch Laren, that they wanted to be pirates Geder and abolish it, and the Gedolim, 60-something Gedolim wrote tshuvas, and amongst the tshuvas is why you have to keep in Kol Nidrei. Okay, now this grada goes in very well with what we said in season 1, that there's a whole, in episode 1 of Kol Nidrei, which was that with the Ramah, it's a Maridik minig, and that's it, we don't shepherd with Minhagim. Fine. Interestingly enough, it seems Reb Shamshon Fal Hirsch at least one time abolished the minig of saying Kol Nidrei in his shul. It's a discussion, what's going on behind it. There's an article about this from Mordechai Breuer, but it's and what happened, why he did it, and what's the story behind that. Going backwards, that's 1844. In the year what year was it? In 1615, a book came out, which is a Yiddish, from a Jew, Zalman Tzvi of Offhuizen, where from Hanau, he published a book which is the defense of Yiddishkeit to various people, and in there we see him defending against to the Goyim of the time. Kol Nidrei was one of the things that he defended, and he talks about it. Recently, this book was translated into English by Professor Morris Feierstein. Okay, going further back, Meshumodim in general had a field day, and Christians also had a field day with the Tefillah of Kol Nidrei. And Yaakov Deutsch, in his incredible book where he documents all these types of things called Judaism in Christian Eyes, he documents that Goyim, it's known that they used to write all Goyim and Meshumodim, at least dozens of books have been written about the minhagim of the Jews. One of the minhagim of Yom Kippur was a big day for them, that they made fun of all different things. One minig that they spoke about, which you find in at least 20 of the works, is about Kol Nidrei. What are we doing Kol Nidrei? So the truth is, you go back a little further, in 1240, there was the trial of the Talmud of Paris, which ended up, because of this, the Talmud was burnt. And you have to understand, there's a period of time, manuscripts, every Gemara that was written, it's not from a publisher and you have it saved in your computer and you could save it. Here, this is destroyed, and from this tremendous output, and it's kedai to discuss this by Richos. But R Yechiel MeParis was the person behind. He was the one that they debated with him. The Christians, possibly some Meshumodim. It's a whole discussion in its own right. In the book, there's a book called The Trial of the Talmud Paris 1240, which has the R Yechiel MeParis in English. But we see that, again, one of the things that was attacked Bechlal was Nedarim. The Goyim claimed that the Jews basically are saying that any promise that they made to us, they're being martyred. That's what they do in Kol Nidrei, which is really the story of what's going on in this Yiddish book and what Yaakov Leitch is bringing down from these Meshumodim. They're claiming is that whatever we say is worthless, whatever we promise is worthless. And says Rabbi Yechiel MeParis in his thing, Chas v'Shalom, we're not talking about our promises to Yidden. Adarabba, we know the promise is very important, and the only way a promise can be abolished is if you have it with the Chacham and the whole whatever we learned in Meshumodim Nedarim and Daf Yomi. Anyway, so we see that history it was attacked many different times. After everything's said and done, today in Klal Yisrael, it seems that everyone does say it. And to conclude with one last Yedidah, although we're cutting out lots of stuff as we go along, but this is life. And the last Yedidah is as follows: that there was a chibur, levushe badim. Not only did people after Kol Nidrei, a lot of times Rabbanim, they gave drashos. So there's a chibur, a fascinating chibur called Levushe Badim from Yedidah Weil, the son of the Karban, who he was born on Yom Kippur, and he gave drashos every Yom Kippur night for over 30 years. It was published from manuscript in 1988. It's a fascinating way to see life in those days. He talks in many of the drashos. He would talk about some aspects of Yom Kippur, some aspects of the Tefillah Kol Nidrei, and you could get a glimpse of life in what he was talking about, what he was giving mussar to. Anyway, this is another thing that Pais can bring down. The Matar Ephraim also, that there was a minig, and a lot of Rabbanim today also have it. They give a drasha, because why? It says Rabbi Weil. This is the time when people are murdik in the mood of their. It's the best time to inspire them. Anyway, these are just some of the some Zaitika Yedidahs, everything, obviously, hopefully one day I hope to publish it more barichos and document it, and they say footnote it, whatever. But these are some of the ideas. We're way over our time, so we'll stop with this.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brodt. For all those who are still listening, Rabbi Dr. Brodt, as he mentioned, hopes to document this, and if you have any other questions or interests in any topics that Rabbi Brodt may be able to crawl down a rabbit hole and dig up information on, please be in touch with him, eliezerbrodt@gmail.com. And Rabbi Brodt, we hope to see you again in the near future on some other topics. Take care and have a wonderful day.